All right, let's just dive right into this. Today, we're unpacking something absolutely wild. We are going to explore a really fascinating, highly unconventional source text called Universal Geography of the Ramayana-era, written by J.C. Arora. If you think you've got a solid handle on the geography of ancient epics, well, you might want to buckle up, because Aurora's interpretation is this massive globe-spanning puzzle that completely redefines the ancient world. Honestly, forget everything you thought you knew about ancient borders, because today, we are looking at a literal map of a lost global civilization. So think about this. What if the Ramayana isn't just a localized story? Because traditionally, when we picture the events of the Ramayana, we imagine them strictly confined to the borders of modern-day India and Sri Lanka. But Arora challenges this entirely. His research posits that this epic actually maps out the entire ancient world as it existed way back around 10,000 BC. He makes the case that we aren't just reading Indian mythology here, we're actually looking at a meticulously recorded history of a sprawling global civilization. Now, to really wrap our heads around this massive scale, we have to talk about Triloki. In the source text, Triloki isn't some mystical, otherworldly realm. It literally translates to the three ancient continents of Asia, Europe, and Africa. Aurora's geography asks us to look at this enormous landmass as a single connected unit. We're talking about a world completely devoid of the sovereign borders that we have today. It's a huge, fundamental shift from viewing the Earth as a bunch of fractured nations to seeing it as one cohesive human habitat. Here is how we're going to break this whole thing down today. First, a global Ramayana. Second, splitting the Earth. Third, the three continents. Fourth, dispatching the armies. Fifth, races of the ancient world. And finally, number 6, a universal heritage. Let's get right into section 1, a global Ramayana, rethinking ancient borders. So the man behind this whole theory, J.C. Arora, wasn't just your standard historian, he was actually a lexicographer, a dictionary maker. And he spent years and years tracing the connections between equivalent words in half a dozen different languages, which led to what he called the laws of Arora. Basically, these are the phonetic rules that dictate exactly how Sanskrit root words transformed as they bled into other global languages over thousands of years. By rigorously applying these linguistic rules to the locations mentioned in the Ramayana, he literally plotted them out onto a modern global atlas. To give you an idea of how much this changes things, traditionally, we're taught that Lanka, the kingdom of Ravana, was an island sitting just south of India. But Aurora's geography flips this radically. He asserts that Lanka was actually located right along the equator in Africa, spanning modern-day Kenya, Mount Kilimanjaro, and the Great Lakes of Uganda. Suddenly, the epic's defining battleground isn't just a neighboring island, it's an entire continent away. It completely rescales the entire physical conflict of the story. Which brings us to section 2, splitting the Earth, and the Tretaya Yuga volcanic eruption. According to Aurora's reading of the text, this global map we are exploring was actually born from a massive, catastrophic geological event. Right at the beginning of the Treta Yuga era, there was this earth-shattering earthquake and volcanic eruption. The text vividly describes the Earth, which, interestingly, it says was previously shaped like a skull, literally cracking into 3 parts, shattered like 3 streaks of fire. In Aurora's eyes, this isn't just a fun myth. It's a recorded, literal historical account of continental drift and extreme seismic activity that permanently altered human existence. So how did this massive split actually organize the world? Well, the Earth settled into these distinct, enormous zones. First up, you have Prachi, or Asia, the eastern lands of the sunrise, ruled by the sun's rays. Then you've got Pratichi, the western lands encompassing Europe, flying the banner of birds. And finally, Dakshin, the southern lands of Africa, flying the banner of the snake. And this right here is exactly how Arora maps the ancient Vedic verses directly onto our modern continental layout. All right, section 3, the 3 continents, exploring the Triloki. Now, what's really cool is that Arora doesn't just rely on his Sanskrit translations to make this claim. He points to some really fascinating historical backup. If you look at historical accounts from prior to Julius Caesar, they also describe the known Earth as being made up of exactly 3 continents: Europa, Africama, and Indiama. And Indiama, in that specific historical context, was actually the entirety of Asia. So this historical framing really supports Aurora's translation that the ancient world was universally understood as a massive triad of connected landmasses long before modern cartography even existed. Let's look at the power dynamics across these massive continents. In Asia, which the text calls Agni Khand, we have the solar dynasty of Raghuvanshi Dasharatha holding sway. But contrast that with Europe, which Arora translates as Hadi Varsha, literally the continent of the Haris, or monkeys, governed by Indra. In this interpretation, the famous Vanaras, or monkeys of the Ramayana, aren't literal animals swinging from trees in southern India. They are actually the human inhabitants of the European continent, flying bird constellations on their banners. Mind-blowing, right? Moving right along to Section 4, Dispatching the Armies, and Sugriva's Global Search. So based on Aurora's geographical tracing, we get this shocking shift in the actual narrative of the story. Sugriva did not launch his massive search for the abducted Sita from a jungle down in South India. Not even close. According to Arora, he was camped at the foothills of the Carpathian Mountains in Europe, in modern-day Czechoslovakia. The original text mentions Pampas a rover, and Arora translates that phonetically, not to some local Indian lake, but to Pontus Euxinus, the massive body of water we know today as the Black Sea. And from there, Sugriva's Eastern Army takes this literal step-by-step overland route that spans across continents. They start their march in the Carpathians. They cross the mighty Danube River. They push eastward right through the Tigris and Euphrates, which, by the way, the text vividly calls the lands of death because it was under the rule of Yama. And finally, they reach the Indus Valley and the sprawling Lotus Lakes of Tibet. By simply following the directional instructions in the text, Arora maps out a perfect, highly logical overland military expedition from Europe straight across the Middle East and into Asia. That brings us to Section 5, Races of the Ancient World and Global Etymology. So Aurora's linguistic research posits that these ancient nomenclatures, these names, weren't just random mythology or fairy tales. They were actually highly scientific and deeply, deeply connected to place. The names of ancient races were tied directly to the stars and constellations right above their lands. They were tied to their physical, lived geography and to the patriarchs of migrating tribes. The people of this era were intricately woven into the very coordinates of the globe they occupied, creating this beautiful unified system of heaven and earth. And when you look at how these etymological links play out in reality, it's pretty stunning. Take the Danavas, often described as demons in later myths. Arora says, nope, they were actually the architects who lived along the river Danube. How about the sacred river Saraswati? Arora maps this directly to the Danube as well, pointing out that Saraswati translates to the River of the Swan, which aligns perfectly with the Cygnus or Swan constellation that is super prominent over that exact region in Europe. Even the Leo races map perfectly to the Zagros Mountains, right where those mythological man-tiger figures were so prominent. It's like a giant puzzle, and every piece fits perfectly. And finally, Section 6, A Universal Heritage and the Quest for Mukti. Now, you might be wondering, why does all of this matter? Well, for J.C. Arora, this wasn't just some fun academic exercise. It was a deeply humanitarian mission, and it all centers around the concept of mukti. Mukti means salvation or emancipation of the soul. But Arora argues that true salvation for mankind can only be achieved when we remember our ancient past, that time when the earth was a single borderless unit. He firmly believed that the multi-hydrous sovereign borders we have today are exactly what caused widespread hunger and division among humanity. The source text is crystal clear on his ultimate goal, and it's perfectly captured in his own words. If we want mukti of mankind, the whole of this earth should be made accessible to all the people of this world. By proving that ancient epics like the Ramayana actually belong to a universal, global geography, Arora really hoped to inspire modern humanity to tear down those sovereign gates. He actually advocated for vast tracts of untitled land around the globe to be gifted to humanity to banish hunger once and for all. He was literally using ancient maps to advocate for a modern utopia.
So whether you totally buy into the linguistic gymnastics of Aurora's global Ramayana or not, you have to admit, his work really forces us to pause and ask a vital question. How does viewing ancient myths through a universal, completely borderless lens change your understanding of human history? Does it make the world feel a bit smaller, more connected, and maybe just a little more shared? It's a pretty profound way to look at the stories that shaped us. Thanks so much for exploring this explainer with me today. Keep questioning the map.